Our live stream audience is with us now.
Colette has arrived.
Yes. Oh,
Oh, Colette.
okay. I gotta.
I have been trying, but evidently it's on the wrong one. I guess I have to delete that one.
Yeah, we haven't had that problem for a while. I don't do that anymore either. There for a while, I would get onto the wrong Zoom too, but I just keep the same one on my screen now. So, how are you, Colette?
I'm frustrated.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Do you need some unwinding time? You want to chill?
No, I just gone through about 1,000 emails canceling, thinking maybe that was canceled tonight or something.
Nope.
But now I've deleted them all.
And
As long as they didn't say Rev Louie on it, I got rid of it.
well, sounds like it was a good work. You're cleaning house a little bit, and you ended up here. That's good.
How are you, Debbie?
I'm doing pretty well, Colette. Yeah, we were just talking about it. I feel pretty good. Slow recovery, but
Yes, I've been thinking about you all week, asking God to make your life better.
well, thank you very much. I appreciate all prayer. Thank you. And how are you? Besides being frustrated.
Well, I'm doing fine. I mean, for a blind, crippled, deaf person.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I have such joy with my pet squirrel. She's been not coming when they usually feed, but at weird times. I guess, she's got 6 babies,
Oh,
and so she's got to wait till the kids are asleep before she can come to eat.
That's probably true. That's probably exactly right.
that's cute.
Well, tonight we are going to look at Psalm 19, which is it's a well-structured psalm, and I think maybe we'll get some good thoughts and some ideas out of it. So let's see if I got it. I got 2 translations of it here in front of me. I've been reading from. It's not real long. It's only 14 verses, but it's a psalm that has been praised. I had in one of my commentators wrote that C.S. Lewis, some of us might know who that is, he wrote that he takes this to be the greatest poem in the Psalter and one of the greatest sets of lyrics in the world. So high praise, not just from him, but from others. Classical musician Haydn wrote a whole piece based on this, an oratorio. And so for some, it's very well known. And it might just be good then to go ahead and start reading. Debbie?
Sure.
Okay.
The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In the heavens he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom from his wedding canopy. and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and nothing is hid from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. But who can detect one's own errors? Clear me from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from the insolent. Do not let them have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
So,
Oh,
I look up
you
and hear.
hear that?
What did you say?
That's something you hear in church a lot.
That's right. This is an oft-quoted psalm, loved and beloved. And look, there's Judy. Hi, Judy.
Oh, hello. Sorry.
It's all right. We're reading from Psalm 19.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's almost no part of this psalm that you haven't heard somewhere else, either in hymns, like you said, or in. There are some preachers that begin every sermon with that phrase, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord." Some beautiful, beautiful phrases in here, not the least of which is how it begins. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims God's handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, night to night declares knowledge. And then this beautiful turn in the poetry, there is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. What beautiful poetry. You know, words all around us, the words, the word of God, the words telling the story of God, telling the story of God's glory and wonder. But yet, if you stop and listen, there's not a single word being said. It's beautiful. Anything else, anything stand out for you in listening to it that you want to comment on?
I like the idea that, like you just said, that there are no words. You don't need words. The workings of the universe are a testament unto themselves. You see the sun rise. You see it cross the heavens. You see the workings of nature, and that's all you need. You don't need someone to tell you, look, at the wonderment. It's there in front of your eyes, and it's beautiful the way this is put. This psalmist had talent.
Yes, yes, a lot of talent. And so the commentators divide the psalm into three parts. The first part goes down through 6, where you have the beautiful descriptions of creation and how it's describing what's referred to as the glory of God. I'm always pushing religious language. I want to push religious language, and I want to push it out of its religious context, and I always want to know more about what it means. So years ago, you hear this phrase, the glory of God, right? The glory of God. And so I came to a settlement. I don't have a good version of it, but I came to a settlement that the glory of God is that which God wants to be famous for. What does God want to be famous for in the world? So when you glorify God, you live or you say the things for which you know God wants to be known for. The things that would be attributes or great value to be associated with God. And so here you have the heavens, the creation. I almost get the feeling, in fact, I looked up this, I looked this up on Google, I actually did Google on Haydn's musical piece on this, instrumental piece on it. And of course, they have a sample of it playing, and the whole time it's playing is the images of the Hubble telescope are circulating, on the video. And I almost wonder, how did the ancient people, I know the night sky was much more pronounced, and you could see a whole lot more in the night sky in the ancient time before electric lights and all the rest of it. But it's amazing to me how the descriptions here of the nature of heaven and the canopy that God has placed across the earth are some of the kinds of words that I would need to describe what I see when you see these images from the telescope of constellations and that go deep, 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 deep into space and beyond even my mind's ability to contemplate or to hold on to how deep space really is. And yet, these words seem to be describing exactly that vision. This poet, this psalmist, has seen into the night, has seen into space and into the cosmos, and then describes the indescribable and hears the unhearable in the words that are being circulated around the globe and around his head. So the first third of the poem, of the psalm, is this adulation, this wonderful proclamation about the wonder and glory of God, and especially everything that it describes in the movement of all creation. Then the second part moves to what it refers to as, maybe it would be like, well, here's the second most amazing thing. If all the creation and firmament and everything is wonder-filled and amazing, the second most amazing thing is, quote, the law of the Lord. And it goes on. It describes the law of the Lord, the law of the Lord. What is the law of the Lord? It's more to be desired than gold, even much gold. And I'm going to say something, and then people will say, really? You're really asking that now at this stage of your career as a pastor, as a teacher? I'm going to tell you, I still don't know always what is meant when it refers to the law of the Lord. It says the law of the Lord is perfect, but is it in describing the Torah, is it simply talking about the Ten Commandments? Is that what it is? And what do you think? What do you think when you hear this, the law of the Lord is? It goes on. It describes the beauty of the law of the Lord, that phrase, okay, the ordinances of the Lord, which are righteous. It almost has as much reverence for this law of the Lord as it has for the wonder of creation and the heavens and the skies and everything else. So, what is the law of the Lord?
I'm not sure. But, the other words that are mentioned together with law are the statutes, and then the commandment, statutes, commandment, and law.
So what are the statutes? What are they?
Yeah. So the only documents, the Torah, what were the other documents that could possibly be,
Well,
implied or evident? What?
the law, I don't know. I'm not kidding. I'm stumped a little on this, and I have been for a long time. I mean, I think about, there must be something I'm missing, because I get it, the beauty of the ordered world and creation and all that, I get it, I'm right there. But what is this thing, the Torah, the statutes, the law?
The Ten Commandments?
I guess, is that it, the Ten Commandments?
I don't know, but I'm looking at words that might suggest, going deeper into thinking about it. The commandments of the law of the Lord, wouldn't that refer back to, or could it not refer back to the Ten Commandments?
I guess that must be what it is.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
It says very clearly in the beginning that there are no words, there's no language, no speech. I think it's something that's instinctual rather than something that's debated. I mean, we have the Ten Commandments, we have the law in the 5 books of Moses, we have the laws in the Quran, and a lot of that is debated endlessly by human beings, and how it applies in our daily lives. But I actually, this is probably blasphemous, but I actually go along with Jesus. What's the law? To love your neighbor and to walk humbly with God. That's probably enough. If most people can master that, I think a lot of the rest of it is instinctual. You know not to then kill people or harm people, or to try and figure out what's the best way to coexist. I don't know, probably oversimplifying, but
No,
I think Jesus.
So
Jesus
the direction
kinda did that too, I think.
I know. The direction you're going in is actually the kind of thing that I'm thinking about in myself. I mean, is this law of God, which is, or the Torah, or the statute, is this a conscience? Is this our conscience? Is this our awareness that there are right things and wrong things to do? And that it's not necessarily written down, but that, when the mother looks at the kid and goes, "You knew better than that." Is it equally as, now let me back up and say, if I go with the Ten Commandments and I say, this is a reverie about the Ten Commandments. This is a reverie about the completeness of the Ten Commandments, about how it seems to have something to say for all of human life. And I could start just with the commandment about Sabbath. It is a profound and wonderful thing that keeps getting rediscovered over and over and over again, that the joy of human living is work, but also rest. that rest, as 1/7 of your life lived in a holy rest is a righteous command. It's beautiful. That I can get behind, the same kind of language, that the law of God is beautiful in and of itself. And it's so organic to human life. It's so, it's absolutely not just God from the outside writing down a law to see to it that we would behave in a certain way. It's, if you observe a Sabbath, and I'm not talking about on a particular day, I'm just saying, if you think of what the law of Sabbath teaches, it teaches that if you want the full life, work hard, do whatever you can do, but take 1 out of 7 and set it aside to restore your body, to restore your mind, to breathe, to restore yourself. And how now I can get behind the psalmist. If I'm thinking about that, I can get behind it. It's the law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are sure, making the wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. If I'm thinking about Sabbath and I'm thinking about rest, that I get that. And maybe the others of the Ten Commandments could also then be unfolded that way. You know, that instead of spending your whole life being envious and jealous of what your neighbor has, how about spending your life celebrating what you have? Mm-hmm. There's a joyful law of the Lord, right?
Is it also maybe two pieces what you're saying and what Debbie was saying, that there are precepts that are intuitive or instinctual, but then you not need something like statutes or commandments to validate or to confirm or to affirm those. Does man not need that? I guess I'm thinking about something analogous to a constitution. I mean, we have a constitution, and man is to treat men, equally and without discrimination, all those things. And yet then we develop a constitution to make sure that those precepts are actually, enacted.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if there isn't something like two pieces, like, as I say, something that is intangible.
Right.
And yet, is it maybe necessary? The Lord thinks, well, okay, maybe they know this or they think this, but I'm going to have to, put something in writing and make sure that the precepts are obeyed. I mean, I don't know what. Anyway, that's what
Yeah, so as you're describing the connection between the idea of the Constitution, but the Constitution isn't the beginning and the end of it. The Constitution describes, again, concepts. There's concepts in there of every person has a vote, all these high and lofty, all human beings are created equal. And the equality under the law and fairness and justice. And so they would be the law of the land, right? That would be the law of the land. And this is talking about the law of God.
Yeah. Well, maybe God thinks, we need some principles that, live by. And it's not enough to just believe, but maybe belief has to be objectified. I don't know.
Well, I think that in the history of religion, at least, in the history of this religion, of Jewish into Christian religion, and maybe also into Muslim, the tendency is for the law of God to be precepts full of wonder, room for us to explore. And then what happens is human beings come along and they make laws.
There you go.
They make laws, and then the laws, they want to argue that the laws are the laws of God, and they're not. They're not the laws of God. They're the laws of human beings. But the law of God, I guess I'm answering my own question in some ways as you're answering it with me, is the law of God is something that is behind, it's higher, it's more poetic. It is a little bit like the conscience, but the conscience alone is not enough. There's real content in the law. And now again, my mind is moving to, the great caution in one of the 10 Commandments is not to be careful not to substitute anything else in life for God. Mm-hmm. Don't make the mistake, of substituting anything. Don't make anything but God out to be God. And I guess that would be one of the law, that would be part of the law of God, right? It would be something that could lead to you also living a full life and and following, I don't know, a code book that helps us to navigate through this wondrous creation, right?
That's it, a code book or commandments or constitution, whatever, that somehow we need, something that we can see to know how to behave, and otherwise, how do we fulfill God's law? Well, you're supposed to fulfill it maybe without, without something tangible to see or to think about, but maybe we need something like that. Maybe we need.
Yeah, I think, I forget the scholarship behind it now, but when I preach on the 10 Commandments, I usually call them the 10 strong suggestions. Because in the original Hebrew, they weren't even in what we call our Bibles, and in the Old Testament, these 10 Commandments exist in sentence form. But in the original Hebrew, they were expressions of one word, sometimes with a negative in front of it, like don't steal, don't envy, rest. And they're these imperative statements, but they're not drawn out sentences, that to honor father and mother. These are guidelines, these are codes that are built into the fabric of a human being's life on this planet. And
I think the psalmist here is saying something like what you and Judy are saying, that there's this bedrock of recognition of the perfect universe, and that doesn't need any explanation. It's there. But then we, being human beings, and we communicate imperfectly with words and speech, and we need that as human beings, otherwise we could fall into chaos. Then there is the law, and this law has been brought to us by prophets, and they're written down, and now they're endlessly debated. Yes. And as human beings are wont to do, we overcomplicate everything, perhaps. But I think that we need both of those things. Yeah. We need to see the ineffable, and then we need to see it written down, because we are human. And that's kind of the way human beings are. We're peculiar creatures. And, we're never going to stop debating the laws of God. We have these outlines, and we love to fill them in. We like to do what we're doing now. We like to debate that. And I guess God knows that. That's the way we humans are. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's a human need. It's just, I think sometimes you can detect when something is false and something is true. And the psalmist is talking about those things which we all kind of seem to feel are true. Like, don't kill other people, don't steal other people's stuff. Those things are beautiful. They help us to get along with one another. Without them, we probably would have, we do have a lot of killing and stealing. Yes. But still, there's at least some, something in the order of things that's beautiful, and if we paid more attention. But then the psalmist goes on, and he's saying, how are we warned? Who can detect their own errors?
Which verse are you at now?
12.
Oh, right. Right. So what the commentators say is that you've now entered into the third part. So that after a reverie, just an unbelievable reverie in the nature of the firmament and the skies and the seas and everything else, then an entrance into the existence of this law of God, which exists. It is there, it's beautiful, it helps us to survive, it exists for us. It's a whole reverie about that. Then he moves into the third, which is he is aware that as beautiful as the creation is and as wondrous as the law is, he knows he doesn't follow it.
There you go.
He violates it.
And unknowingly, too. That's the scary
Unknowingly, even unknowingly. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them, there's great reward in keeping them, but who can detect their errors? And he's aware, as he's begun to think about his own life, he sees a disconnect between the reverie of the world and creation and everything and the beauty of God's code book. Mm-hmm. The beauty of the code book, the beauty of, don't envy your neighbors, like rest and honor your mother and father. And isn't that beautiful? Isn't that wondrous? And then he starts to think about himself and the fact that how can it be that in such a beautiful world with such a beautiful code book that he lives his life the way he does?
Mm.
That's where prayer
That's
comes
how I
in.
kind of think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Debbie.
No, I was going to say that's where prayer comes in. Then the psalmist knows that for this last part, he has to depend upon God alone.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But in my mind, yeah, I just, the word law, suggests, and all of it suggests some kind of accountability that, that something's missing. I mean, we can have this intuitive and have, all of this feeling, and we can have something written down. We have the commandment, we have the code book, but then if it's violated, I mean, there's no space here for accountability. I mean, it's just presented, and there's choices, and human beings have to make these choices. But if they violate any pieces of the code book, what happens? There's no accountability. It's
Well,
I don't know.
I think he makes a provision for that when he says, who can detect their errors, keep me from hidden faults. Then he says, keep back your servant also from the insolent, the people who are disregarding the laws. Like, do not let them have dominion over me. And so he's aware that it's possible for him not only to violate the laws, but to surround himself by a bunch of people who don't care about the laws, don't care about the right or good way to live, and then he cries out to God to say, "Do not let that take over my life. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression." And I think again, it's if God intercedes, like Debbie said, now he's pleading with God to say, you're going to have to be my obedience. Like, you're going to have to make up for the gap. Mm. And so pleading with God, saying, okay, now, then shall I be blameless. Why blameless? Not blameless because I envied my neighbor. I have worked nonstop and never rested. I've done all these things. How can this person now be blameless? They're blameless because he's cried out to God. And he has asked the maker of the code, the maker of the ordinance, to rescue him or her.
So it's not his job to monitor.
Right.
Well, it's kind of a partnership, I would think.
Yeah.
The human being does all they think they can do, but they know they're not complete without God's grace. So you ask for God to intervene on your behalf, perhaps.
And think about, so this the beautiful last phrase, think about what it actually says. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable unto you. Now, what I see here room for is, he knows he's going to talk and he's going to think things. He's going to think things in his heart, but he's asking God to embrace it, to take it, to accept it, to allow it to be good enough, if you will.
Right.
Not because it's perfect, the law is perfect, but the psalmist is not perfect. He's not. And so he's asking God to stand in the gap.
It's kind of an arrogance on human beings' part to think that they know everything, we can do everything, we're in charge of everything. This is giving equal partnership to God. Please help us in this enterprise, and please accept what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure what I'm doing is right, but please let it be so. Please act in my behalf. I take it as a beautiful partnership in this. It's,
But there's no responsibility then for those, to those or for those people who obeyed or who avoid or who, violate the code.
So
there's lots of there's lots of blame there, because if your conscience tells you that you are violating the law, then it's when you don't, when you're not sure. He says, how can I be sure? I put my trust in God.
But if you're talking about a partnership, how about his neighbor? If he sees his neighbor violating the code, is it his responsibility to step in, to intervene, or does he just think about himself in relationship to God?
So
I think, go ahead.
I'd like to hear more, Judy, about what's troubling you about no accountability.
I guess the word accountability comes up around and round. I just, you have a code, you know what you're supposed to do, and you know what you want to do, but you see other people violating that. Do you walk away? Do you dismiss? Do you just feel that as long as you are abiding by the code, that's enough?
So I hear that, but I think you're going beyond the scope of what the meditation is about. Like, I don't think the answers to your questions are here in the psalm. They're good questions, and they are important questions for how do you live by the law of God. I think in this case, it's almost an individual reverie. There's nobody else in this. This is a reverie of one human being standing and looking up to the heavens and hearing what can't be heard, seeing what can't be seen, and being overwhelmed with the awesomeness of God. And then he becomes aware somehow through that process that also built into the very wonder and structure of creation, there's a code book. There is a known way to live. How then shall I live in light of the wonder and the awesomeness and the beauty of this? And that word has been shared. That word is there. It's not a mystery. It's been shared. And so then he gets excited about, yay! The code book is here, and how to survive and how to live and all that. But now, to your point about looking around, I think somehow he's aware that there's an awful lot of people who don't give any regard whatsoever to the code. They live without regard to that. And then he asks God for this. He says, please, God, don't let me get caught up with that.
Okay.
Don't let me get caught up in that. And by the way, maybe he's already aware that he has to some point. And so even though the clear language of confession is not here, one of the commentators says that they think he's heading towards a prayer of confession. He's saying...
Well, on verse 11, he's saying, moreover by them, meaning the code book, as you we put it.
Right.
Them is your servant warned.
Yes.
So you have this structure, and if you keep them, you have great reward. He's realizing that.
Yes.
And then he's going beyond that and saying, but I still am not 100% sure that even if I do all that I am going to be blameless. How do I know? And then he answers his own question. I know because God is in this with me.
Right.
I will rely on God, and I will ask for, that my meditations and the things I'm thinking now are acceptable. And that's all he can do. He may go on to find some fault within himself because he knows the law, and then he can fix it. But I think he's, like Pastor Lou said, this is just one person's contemplation of of what it means to be human and be in the universe. And he's not going to go beyond that right now. He's just talking about his own relationship with the universe and God and the law and how to live his own life.
To separate that from I'm your brother's keeper or whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
right. There's a commentator, again, I keep going back to this verse 11 and following. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. This is a reverie still about the law, right? About the code book. I get warnings by them. And then it says, in keeping them, there's great reward. Okay, awesome. But who can detect their errors? In other words, he's now aware that he might not always keep these codes. And then he says, clear me from hidden faults of actually breaking these codes, living in violation of the law of God, and not even being aware of it.
Right.
Keep me from that. And then he says, keep back your servant also from the insolent. And the footnote changes that word to being proud. Like walking around and going, look, I see these wonderful, beautiful laws, and I'm so glad, that I keep them. And then he realizes that maybe one of the downside of having the code is that you could become arrogant in thinking that you follow them. And now you've somehow slid off the wagon. Keep back your servant from the insolent, the proud. Do not let them have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. So the humility comes in to be able to imagine that I may in fact violate these codes. And that's where the partnership comes in.
Right.
So then the prayer then blooms into let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. I think the rock is the law, which you can stand on, and the redeeming need is when you slip off of it. The redeemer is someone who saves you from that which would destroy you. So God is not only the rock, but also redeems us.
Yeah, I love that part where he says, keep me from the haughty, the insolent.
Yeah.
When you start to think, yeah, I got all this, I'm doing everything right, I'm living a blameless life, I'm wonderful, I'm great, I've got that power in me to understand and do the right thing. That's when you've actually gone wrong.
Yeah.
Because you're not leaving any room for you to do something unknowingly. And that's where God's grace comes, and that's what he's asking for, I think.
Yeah. And I think, Judy, it makes me think about your question, which is a good question about, well, what about other people? And I think that, Jesus points this out a lot, that one of the tricks of trying to live by this law thing is that sometimes you'll be able to see the failure of another more clearly than you'll be able to see your own. You know, he does that whole thing about you see a speck in your neighbor's eye, but you haven't seen the log which is sticking out of your own. And I think, you know, there's a tricky navigational road here. How are we to live with the call of our own lives to hear the law of God, to know that it's good and it's right? I mean, you know, this may get into a whole political discussion, but you know, I grew up in the time of the blue laws. So Christians dominated the landscape in, you know, 1920, 1930, 1940, and even earlier. They dominated the landscape, and people still cared about what the church was teaching, and the church taught Sabbath. The Christian church taught Sabbath. And so they wrote laws that said people may not work on Sunday. And the grocery stores were closed on Sunday and everything, not like here in Bergen County where they're closed just for traffic reasons, but they were closed because Christians were interpreting, quote, the law of God as to say that Sunday no work was to be done. And so then it's enshrined not as a law of good life and good health and all that, it's a law. And then people would turn their neighbors in for violating the law. And you would get, you know, tickets and all kinds of things for violating the law.
Yeah, I grew up in Boston and we had the blue laws. They were very strong. Yeah, I remember, right? Yeah.
And I think it's a slippery slope that moves from the innate or inherent or beautiful law of God to the laws of humans. And then how are we, I think, again, going back to your thoughts, Judy, how are we supposed to live if in a world where maybe we're the only ones that care about the law of God? Maybe everybody else doesn't care at all. And I think, you know, as time has gone by, we've become a little more sophisticated in understanding what, quote, the law of God is. And maybe in America, we're a little bit less legalistic about thinking that the laws of God are the same as the laws of human beings. And that maybe we'll give permission for people to live their lives and to explore what it means to live by the law of God in their own way. And I'm following Debbie's original worry about being heretical and saying, you know, I think in some ways Jesus simplified the whole discussion. You know, that innate to every human being is a law, which is written on the human's heart. And some live by it, some live to defy it. But it is a law of love. And the law to love your neighbor as yourself. That goes back to my reading of Genesis and Debbie's, again, statement about partnership, that from the very beginning, the ancients never saw the rules, if you will, of life as like, you know, here's a line, you step across it, now you'll be punished. What they saw was, okay, how are we going to do this partnership? How are we going to walk through life together? You're going to make mistakes. Okay, well, I'm going to have a plan for that. And we're going to walk and we're going to move through life so that in the end, life is not about just obeying the rules. Life is about living life. And all the things that go into making life possible, with respect, the beauty of the law of God are those kinds of guidelines that will keep life going, that will allow life to bloom and not be stifled or choked by regulations and all kinds of things that give you no freedom in this life.
I think that's why there are so many colleges and places of higher learning that are just there to debate about the laws of God and how we interpret them, and do they change over time in respect to modernity? How do we live with that and still fulfill the law that how we know it? And this is an ongoing debate. I mean, it's hard to determine, you know, but I like the simplicity of, okay, is it love? Okay, I'll do it. If it's not, maybe not so much. It makes it a lot easier. But there is this need to explore, what do we mean by this law? What do we mean by that? You know, I like the idea in Islam where it says, beware taking offices of, you know, like government officials and officials of the mosques and the places of learning, and because much responsibility goes with that. If you are, you know, if you think you have any, you know, tendency toward self-aggrandizement or putting yourself above the law and all the rest of the people, if you're in it for yourself and to enrich yourself, those kinds of things, don't do it, because you're going to be held even more accountable, because to those who have much is expected. And it's really a big sin to say you want to be president or, you know, governor or whatever, and wield this power and make it for your own gain and not for the good of the people. So there's a real cautionary thing there. And I think that's part of what this psalmist is talking about, the insolent. You know, there's that great temptation. Positions of power come with great temptation to do the wrong thing.
Right.
And you're going to be held even more accountable than Joe Blow down the road, who's just maybe, you know, the potentate of his own household. Now you're the guy in charge or the woman in charge of the whole country, and you're doing things for yourself and not, you know, so like Pharaoh. Pharaoh is always in Islam held to the highest, you know, degree of castigation. I mean, he is the most horrible because he had all this power. He could have done good. Instead, he's tormenting people. So,
well, in that way, Islam's treatment of Pharaoh joins with the African American Christian tradition, because Pharaoh's talked about all the time in the black church, all the time. And that's because Pharaoh represents, and Pharaoh's not only the pharaohs of the past either. You know, they talk about the pharaohs of the present time who are making life harder for other people, using their power to make life harder, using their power to make themselves richer, and then they also talk a lot about the pharaoh of your heart. That there are pharaohs that exist in your own heart that don't serve you well, that are, you know. But all of that is in reference to the law of God. And the Pharisees said to Jesus, "What's the greatest commandment? Which one is the most important to follow?" Because, you know, by the time they came along, there were like 457 laws. Which one's the most important? And Jesus says, the most important is the first one you learned when you were a child. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Yep. And all of the law, he says, all of the law and the prophets come from that. They come from that. You know, and then, of course, the debaters and the splitters of hairs come in and go, well, what is love? What does it really mean? What does it mean to love someone? Or to do the work of love. Okay, then, because life still exists in debate, it's not cut and dried. It never will be. But you can still get inside the parentheses of it. You still know what love is and what hate is, and what anger and rage looks like. That's not love. So the law of God. I'm still, after all this time though, I'm still going to come back to where I was in the very beginning, and I'm going to tell you that I'm still not sure. Look at verse 7. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. And every time I read it, and I read it in the Hebrew Scriptures and in the New Testament, I want to go, okay, could somebody get that law out for me? could you take me to it?
No.
Could I read it, please?
You're not going to know. That's why he's asking for understanding his own failings, because the law is perfect, but our comprehension of it may not be.
So is it my conscience? Is that what it is? Is my conscience? I mean, am I born with an inherent knowledge of the law of God?
I like to believe most people, I mean, everyone is. I would like to believe that. And it's only through circumstances as we grow that may lead us away from that. You know, if we're abused when we're young, we're taken away from what should be our rightful life of love in God's universe. We're just, is it our fault? Sometimes not, but you know, things happen to make people go off the deep end. Sometimes there's some kind of neurological problem, some kind of physical problem. Sometimes it's like in Islam, we call it diseases of the heart. And they're caused by lots of things that some are beyond our control and some are very much in our control. But so, the law is perfect. We just don't perceive it.
So,
I think that the converting is an important word. Converting maybe the wise the simple, so that there is an understanding, you know, after a period of time, that the simple come wise, that there is a conversion. I don't know.
do you think that my thoughts about this have changed from time to time? But you know, when you hang around children, do you think children are naturally selfish?
Sometimes they are, yeah.
I mean, you know, in the old days, and I mean the old days, you know, all about preschool and training and everything was to teach children how important it is to share, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you see children take things and they pull them for themselves. What I've come to believe is that those children never learned those lessons, then they grew up and became adults, and they still don't know how or don't want to share. But I also am more aware that there is a light that shines in children, that more than we see sometimes, that they are infinitely willing to share. They seem to be able to, you know, wade through that, and you know, they'll give away the new toy that they were just given. There's lots of opportunities, if you're looking for it, to see that as well. So do they have, now also, before I even take a breath, I'm going to say that, you know, John Calvin and others believed that every child was a total abomination. You know, that children are born sold out to sin, and that they can't do anything in line with the law of God to save their lives. They are just completely lost. And if it weren't for the life and then ultimately the death of Jesus on the cross, all the sinful ways and all the terrible ways of human beings would be just the final word. They're saved, but they're not saved because they're just somehow Christ fixes it.
I think that's an awful way to look at human beings. I love the idea that children are newly, departed from God. That children exist with God, and they are the freshest things. They come right from God, and then they're contaminated by the rest of us.
Yes.
So they're more perfect, because they've just been with God and are put into this world. I like to believe that. I don't, that's just the way I feel, but I hate Calvin's idea that we're all born horrible worms. And
Yeah, I do
terrible.
too. I do too. I think it was born out of a misreading of the Genesis text for one thing, but I just don't believe it. I mean, I think I look at Jesus' conversation with the disciples when they said, who's the greatest disciple? Who's the greatest follower of your path? And he takes a child. He doesn't pick one of his disciples. He doesn't pick one of the adults who've been in his classes and have seen his miracles. He takes a child from the crowd, picks the child up, and to me, what Jesus is demonstrating is that the greatest illustration of discipleship or following of God is the ability to trust. And that child is able to trust Jesus, is able to allow Jesus, a stranger, to pick him up, to walk him around and make an object out of him. And then Jesus points to the fact that an infant is the greatest example of living this life according to the law of God, because the law of God is you have to live by faith. You have to live and recognize your own inability to be on your own and to live by faith and to be able to be comfortable with that. And again, to me, that's why as much as I don't like about Calvin or Augustine, I do like that they associated baptism, or the sign of God's full acceptance, with infants. Because I think that's the best place to teach that there's nothing you can or need to do to receive the full acceptance and love and grace and protection of God. There's nothing. It's undeniable, and it is for you. The only question is, are you aware of it? And that's what this child that Jesus holds is. He says, unless you have faith like a child, and you don't come from your own standards of saying I'm a good person or I'm a bad person or whatever. You just trust. And so maybe that be another way of summarizing the law of God is a requirement that you trust in God. And if you trust in God, who you can't see and you can't hear, but the words are there in all of nature, and the law of God is there. It comes in ways you really can't quite touch or see, but it's there. And then as you lean to it and discover it, you'll find that you can't do it perfectly. Who can trust like that? Nobody can. And yet, in the moment where you realize that you can't, then you're aware of a new level of trust, which is that God is right there. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable, O God. He doesn't say, let me say the right thing. He doesn't say, let me think the right thing or believe the right things. He says, let what I think, say, and believe be acceptable to you, O God. It's a beautiful, beautiful, it's almost like a picture of just falling into God's arms and saying, here I am. Just, let my acceptability be on you, in your hands. And isn't that the culmination of the law? Mm-hmm. That I am in your hands, God. And that phrase becomes a great expression of trust in God's companionship with us in life.
Too bad Calvin didn't read Psalm 19 over and over and over.
I agree. I agree totally. I
Yes. It's a beautiful
It really
Beautiful
is.
song.
It is really a beautiful psalm. And you think about all those psalms that get tied up in revenge and thinking about God punishing our enemies and everything. Here's a thing of beauty.
Yep.
Absolutely a thing of beauty. And
Yes.
as I'm reading through it, I can think of 5 or 6 hymns that captured phrases from this psalm and became the basis of the whole hymn that was sung. And actually, one of the commentators points out that it's a shame in a way, but that this psalm, in the function of the cultic religion of the Hebrews, was sung. It was sung. But the music that went with it, we've lost. We have the words, but we don't know the melody. We don't know the tune to which this psalm was sung. And wouldn't it be beautiful? Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to hear the music that this was set to?
That would be nice. At the beginning of the psalm, you usually tell us who the psalm was for or who was written by. What was the
All right, I'm going to look.
for this?
The chief musician.
It's a psalm. This says that phrase in the beginning that I talked about, which is it's a psalm of David. That's the way it's translated in English. But the truth is, it just means it can be a psalm to David. It can be a psalm about David. It's a psalm that they have associated with the kind of, I don't know, reputation that David had among them.
In my Bible, it says to the chief musician, the Psalm of David.
Yes. To the leader, to the chief musician. And sometimes those are just like instructions to the choir master. I was looking to see if here it gives a date for this. All it does is talk about the different parts. It's a wisdom hymn. It was a hymn, though it also has features of a prayer. With respect to its original initial composition, it should probably be read primarily as a creative and literary work, though later it came to be used within the regular worship of Israel. Several scholars have taken the wisdom character of the psalm to be indicative of an exilic or post-exilic date, which means much, much, much later than David, way later than when David existed. There is no unambiguous evidence that might determine whether the author, who is the author, or the actual date of this beautiful psalm. So, there's no clue, except that they would say it was probably from the time of just before the exile, or maybe during the exile, that this artist wrote this beautiful psalm to God. And then, when, as the diaspora, when Jerusalem was being rebuilt, it would be very popular because this would be, having been written already, would be one of the psalms that would be part of their worship liturgy in the temple. When Jerusalem, when the city was rebuilt and when the temple was rebuilt. This was probably in their hymn book. In fact, when you have the Psalms, you have their hymn book. But I think it was written long after the time when King David was on the throne. All right, well, I think maybe with such a beautiful psalm, we shouldn't wreck it. Let's not.
What's going on?
Don't take their chances.
Yeah, we don't need to take our chances that the psalmist is going to get vengeful and angry in the next psalm. So, thank you for coming out tonight. I do want to let you know that I am going to take another vacation. I'm going to be gone next Tuesday night. I'll be in Washington, D.C., visiting my daughter, Paige. And then the following Tuesday night, I'll also be gone because I'm going to be back fishing in Canada again. And so I'll send out an email reminder just to let everybody know. But I'll be looking forward to getting back together with you then on the last week of August. Okay? All right.
Okay.
Very nice to see you all tonight. Debbie, continue on your healing.
Take a rest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
You need to take a rest, right?
I am
Everyone
going to
needs
take.
go fishing.
I am going to take a rest, and fishing will be secondary. Resting will be first. Okay. Good night. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good
Yeah.
night. Good night.
Right.